Welcome back to What You Need to Know for Audio Engineers. This video we're talking about gain. Probably the most important part of the rehearsal is setting gain and getting the gain correct for each channel on the soundboard. So first of all, what is gain? What is it? A very kind of low-tech and somewhat fudgy definition of gain could be the total amount of signal coming through a channel. So let's say a drum, let's say the snare drum. The drummer hits the snare drum, and there's a certain amount of volume that is created from that stick on that snare head. And that is one aspect of gain. But it's not the only aspect of gain. There's also the preamp. The preamp is the control that the audio engineer has over the gain. So the musician makes a sound, and that's a certain volume, and that goes into the preamp, and we have control over how loud or how quiet the preamp is, how much gain is in the preamp. So we measure gain in decibels, and we have meters on each of the channels at the soundboard that shows the level of decibels, the number of decibels that's coming into that channel. So why is gain important? Gain is important because the gain of each channel feeds the entire mix, and it feeds not only the main mix but the in-ear monitor mixes for the musicians on stage as well. So if the gain is not set properly, then, well, the first and biggest problem is that the musicians won't be able to hear themselves. And the second problem is that we won't be able to balance the instruments properly in a mix if we are not properly setting the gain and controlling the gain. So when it comes to sound check happens as the first part of rehearsal. It's the very first thing that everyone does when we get to rehearsal. We check the levels of the gain. We check the gain of each instrument. And it's very important that we set the gain consistently across all of the channels. So there's a number of decibels that we're aiming for. And that number might be 0, it might be -9 or -12, it might be +10, it might be +15. It depends on the type of meter that you're using. But there should be a number that you are aiming for all of the instruments to be set to, so that the gain, the preamp, and the volume of each instrument coming into the soundboard is as consistent and even as possible. And when we sound check the instruments, we sound check them so that the loudest sound that they can possibly make does not clip the preamp. So clipping is distortion, and distortion, we don't want distortion in our mixes, so we need to make sure that our preamps are not clipping. And to do that, we need to make sure that the loudest sound that any musician can make, any sound source, everything, none of those should be clipping the preamps. So let's talk about a couple of problems that can happen with gain and the solutions to those problems. The first issue that we've already talked about, is clipping. Clipping happens when there's too much signal coming in to the preamp. The preamp is clipping, it's distorting, and it's causing some nasty sounds that we don't want to hear. So how do we fix this issue of clipping at the preamp? Obviously, we can turn the preamp down, and that may be all we need to do. Maybe the preamp is just set too high. In some instances, and this has been the case for us in the past, the preamp has been set to its minimum setting, but we're still getting clipping on the input, specifically from things like guitars, line-out instruments. A lot of times, instrumentalist musicians are not exactly aware of the volume that they're sending out of their, effects processors, out of their instruments, out of their pedal boards, things like that. They're not always aware of how loud they have their patches. So we can ask them to adjust the volume of their patch and to set them to consistent levels. Um, or we can engage a pad. This is something different from a synth pad. A synth pad is an instrument. This kind of pad is a decibel pad. It's a circuit, an electrical circuit, which reduces gain, usually by about minus 15 dB. Engage a pad on the soundboard, or a lot of direct boxes are equipped with pads. So since DI instruments are the ones that are most commonly going to be running into this issue, we can go up to the stage and just quietly engage the pad on the direct box. So there's issues when there's too much volume coming from the musician. We can also have issues when there's too little volume coming from the musician. And this isn't so much of an issue with direct box instruments, because we could just compensate with preamp gain to bring them to the proper level. But with microphone instruments, singers, acoustic instruments, this is a little bit more of an issue, because as soon as we start to compensate with the gain for someone who's singing or playing too quietly, we can start to hear this humming sound, and it grows louder and louder and louder and higher pitched. This is called feedback. So how do we fix this issue? We know what the issue is. There's too little volume coming from the musician on stage. So we ask them to increase their volume, to play louder or to sing louder. This is easier said than done, because usually someone is singing quietly and sheepishly because they don't want to be heard. So communication is the fix there. Communicate with that person, ask them, hey, are you able to sing any louder? We just need to be able to get some more volume from you so we can hear you. And of course, everybody in the band is going to turn and say, yeah, of course, we would love to hear you. We really want to hear you. Please sing louder. We're excited to have you here this week to join the worship band. Sing louder. That might be all that person needs, to sing louder. It's of course might not fix the issue immediately. There's a lot of comfort that someone has to have on stage. They have to be comfortable there. They have to be comfortable wearing in-ears. And the more we can kind of understand that perspective by wearing in-ears and performing in in-ears, being a musician in the worship band, we can kind of get some extra perspective that can help us navigate a situation like that. But yes, feedback can happen as a result of them singing too quietly. They're not singing loud enough, so we compensate with the gain. We get this feedback loop happening. The only solution is that the person on stage has to be playing or singing more loudly. They have to increase their volume. So it's very important that there's only one person in the room who is controlling the gain, the level of gain for everything. And that person has to be the audio engineer. And we have to be careful of how we set the gain. We have to set it so that the loudest sound doesn't clip. The loudest sound that person can make has to be set below the threshold of clipping. And that has to be the case for everything. And this is good. This means that the engineer controls the mix. The engineer controls the in-ear monitor mixes as well. But the musicians still control their dynamics.